기술다.
Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Michael and this morning I'm going to talk to you about the Type 42 guided missile destroyer. As you can see, I've divided my talk into three parts. The first, I'm going to say something about the history of the destroyer. Then I'm going to talk about the equipment. And finally, I'm going to say a little bit about the role. This talk will last about 3 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Okay? Right then, so let's move on to the first part, which is the history. The Type 42 destroyer was originally designed in the late 1960s, and its original purpose was fleet area air defense. It was seen as a lighter, cheaper replacement for the Type 82, which then was never built. The Type 42 replaced it. In total, 16 of these destroyers were built, 14 for the Royal Navy and 2 for the Argentine Navy. These destroyers were commissioned between 1975 and 1985, and they were decommissioned or scrapped in the years between 1919 and 2013. In fact, there is still one active destroyer. All the rest are no longer in use. The interesting thing about this destroyer is that it was used on both sides during the Falklands War, and in fact 2 of the Royal Navy destroyers were sunk by the Argentine Navy, and it was also used later on in the First Gulf War around 1991. So that's a little bit about the history, and now I'm going to talk to you about the equipment. Okay, so these are the main features that this destroyer has. It has Sea Dart surface-to-air missile. It contains a flight deck and a hangar which can be used for anti-submarine warfare helicopters. In terms of weapons, it has a 114mm Mark 8 naval gun and 6 torpedo launchers. It also has sophisticated electronic radar systems and Rolls-Royce gas turbine engines. Now, these destroyers were built in 3 batches, and there are some differences between the batches, which I've set out in this table here. So very briefly, the first 2 batches, the characteristics, the size of the vessels was very much the same. The third batch were bigger. So we can see this is the displacement full load in tons. So B3 is 1,000 tons heavier, or the displacement is 1,000 tons greater than the earlier batches. It's a little bit longer, another 16 meters longer than the batch 1 and 2, and slightly bigger in the beam. Otherwise, the draft was the same, the maximum speed is the same, and the crew size, the capacity of the vessel, was also a little bit larger. Another big difference between the batches was the cost of building the destroyers. So the first 5 or 6, which were in batch 1, the cost ranged from 23 up to 40 million. The second batch cost between 60 and 92 million, and the third batch all cost 110 million and upwards. So quite a big difference there. Partly, I think, due to the more sophisticated technology that was used later on, the fact that B3 was a bigger boat, and also, of course, due to inflation. I'm going to finish by saying a little bit about the roles of the destroyer. We've seen that it was deployed in the Falklands War and the Gulf War. Later on, it was used not as a war vessel, but as part of the expeditionary defense policy. It was used to escort ships without carrying any weapons. It was also used extensively as a patrol vessel in the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, and the Mediterranean. But as the time went by, these ships became older, they became less reliable, they became more expensive and more difficult to maintain. So they were gradually replaced by the Type 23 vessels. And as we've seen, now it's really the end of the life of the Type 42 guided missile destroyer. So that's my brief introduction to the topic. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.